In 1967, Royal Enfield was standing in an uncomfortable place. The company had history, it had racing heritage, it had a loyal following, and a name that had been attached to motorcycles for generations. But the motorcycle world was changing. Riders were beginning to look beyond Britain. Japanese manufacturers were entering international markets with motorcycles that offered modern engineering, impressive performance, and a level of refinement that threatened the old British formula. Royal Enfield couldn't simply rely on its reputation. It needed a motorcycle that could answer the new challenge. That motorcycle was the Interceptor 750. And unlike some of Britain's more famous twins, the Interceptor wasn't trying to preserve the past. It was an attempt to push Royal Enfield's existing ideas further than they had ever gone. The result was a large British parallel twin with a very different personality from the company's smaller motorcycles. It was faster, more aggressive, more ambitious, and it arrived at almost exactly the wrong moment. The Interceptor's story begins with Royal Enfield's twin-cylinder motorcycles. The company had already experimented with parallel twins during the 1950s, eventually developing machines that were increasingly focused on performance. The Interceptor represented the next step. Its engine was enlarged to 736 cc, giving the motorcycle the kind of displacement necessary to compete in the growing 750 cc performance class. That number mattered. During the 1960s, 650 and 750 cc motorcycles were becoming increasingly important in the performance market. Riders wanted more power, more speed, and motorcycles capable of handling long stretches of highway without struggling. The Interceptor was built for exactly that environment. But Royal Enfield did not simply enlarge an existing engine and call it finished. The company developed the motorcycle around a stronger and more sporting specification. The engine used a 360-degree crankshaft, giving the twin a distinctive rhythm and a very recognizable character. With twin carburetors and a relatively high-performance state of tune, the Interceptor could produce around 50 horsepower. Again, that number doesn't sound dramatic today, but in the late 1960s, it meant something. A motorcycle with a 736cc twin, producing around 50 horsepower, had enough performance to be genuinely exciting. And the Interceptor wasn't designed to be a delicate machine. It was intended to be used. That was especially important in the American market. Royal Enfield understood that the United States represented an enormous opportunity. American riders were buying motorcycles for recreation, transportation, touring, and performance. The Interceptor was particularly well suited to that environment. Its large engine gave it strong highway performance. Its riding position was relatively comfortable. And its styling had the unmistakable appearance of a British motorcycle without making it look old-fashioned. The motorcycle carried a long fuel tank, a substantial twin-cylinder engine, traditional spoked wheels, and chrome details that immediately identified it as a product of the British motorcycle industry. But there was something more purposeful about the Interceptor. It looked like a motorcycle designed to travel, not merely around town, not merely between villages, but across long roads where the engine could finally stretch its legs. Open the throttle and the 736cc twin delivered the kind of strong mechanical acceleration that had become the signature of big British motorcycles. The engine didn't need to rev like a modern sport bike. Its appeal was in the way it built speed. The rider could feel the engine working beneath the tank. There was vibration, mechanical noise, and the unmistakable pulse of two large pistons moving together. That physical connection was part of the experience. But Royal Enfield had a bigger problem than simply building a fast motorcycle. It needed to sell the idea that British motorcycles still belonged in the future. That was becoming increasingly difficult. Japanese manufacturers were changing the conversation. Honda had demonstrated that motorcycles could be remarkably refined. Yamaha and Suzuki were developing increasingly sophisticated machines. Kawasaki was preparing to enter the high-performance arena with its own approach. The Japanese manufacturers weren't simply copying British motorcycles. They were building a different manufacturing philosophy: consistency, reliability, precision. modern production methods, and increasingly sophisticated engine designs. The British manufacturers were suddenly being judged by standards that hadn't existed a decade earlier. Royal Enfield knew it had to respond. The Interceptor was one response. It was larger, faster, and more ambitious than many of the motorcycles associated with Royal Enfield's earlier years. But there was an important difference between the Interceptor and the Japanese motorcycles beginning to appear. The Interceptor was still unmistakably mechanical. The rider was expected to understand the machine. The carburetors were part of the experience. The engine demanded maintenance. The electrical system wasn't something you simply ignored. The motorcycle rewarded attention. For riders who loved traditional British motorcycles, this was an advantage. For riders looking for effortless reliability, it could become a disadvantage. And that tension would define the final years of the British motorcycle industry. The Interceptor itself had plenty of ability. Its frame and suspension were designed to handle the performance of the large twin, while the brakes were developed to give the rider sufficient control over the motorcycle's speed. It wasn't a race bike, but it was certainly a sporting road machine. And on an open road, that distinction mattered less. The motorcycle could cover distance quickly. It had enough torque to make overtaking easy. It could cruise at highway speeds without feeling like the engine was being pushed beyond its limits. And when the road became narrow and winding, the rider could enjoy the mechanical character of the twin. This was one of the reasons big British twins had survived for so long. They were versatile. A good one could be a commuter on Monday, a touring motorcycle on Saturday, and a performance machine on an empty road Sunday morning. The Interceptor belonged to that tradition, but it was also trying to move beyond it. Royal Enfield's engineers knew that the 750cc class was becoming increasingly competitive. The Interceptor needed to look serious, and it did. The engine dominated the motorcycle visually. Twin exhausts stretched rearward. The fuel tank created a long, elegant silhouette. The riding position was relatively upright but still purposeful. There was no unnecessary bodywork. The motorcycle's mechanical parts were the design. That simplicity gave it an identity. You didn't have to guess what kind of motorcycle it was. It was a British twin, and it was proud of it. But the Interceptor's greatest strength may have been its performance potential. The motorcycle could approach the kind of speeds that made it a legitimate competitor in the large-capacity British motorcycle market. Depending on conditions and gearing, it could reach around 110 miles per hour. That put it in serious territory. But speed wasn't enough. The Japanese competition was making riders think differently. The question was no longer simply, how fast is it? Riders were beginning to ask, how easily does it start? How smoothly does it run? How often does it need attention? How well is it built? How good are the brakes? How modern is the electrical system? Those questions were dangerous for British manufacturers because the old advantages were becoming less important. British motorcycles had character. They had history. They had racing heritage. They sounded fantastic. But the Japanese manufacturers were learning how to offer excitement without demanding the same level of mechanical involvement. That was a powerful combination. Royal Enfield was therefore caught between two worlds. The Interceptor represented the best of the traditional British approach, but the market was beginning to reward a different approach. This makes the 1967 Interceptor especially interesting today. It wasn't an obsolete motorcycle. Far from it. It was actually one of Royal Enfield's most ambitious performance machines. The problem was timing. The motorcycle arrived just as the industry was beginning to change faster than the British companies could adapt. Imagine being a rider in 1967. You walk into a showroom looking for a fast motorcycle. You see the Interceptor. It has a large twin. It has British styling. It has a strong reputation. It has enough power to be exciting. You can imagine yourself riding it across the country. Then you look at the competition. Suddenly the decision becomes harder. The world is offering alternatives that promise a different kind of ownership. This wasn't a battle Royal Enfield could solve with horsepower alone. It was a battle over the future. And the Interceptor was Royal Enfield's attempt to prove that the British twins still had a future. The engine was at the heart of that argument. A 736cc parallel twin is a substantial piece of machinery. The engine had presence. The twin-cylinder layout created a strong exhaust note and a physical sense of movement. The rider could feel the pistons working, the crankshaft turning, the motorcycle responding to the throttle. That mechanical feedback is almost impossible to reproduce exactly in a modern motorcycle. Modern engines are smoother, quieter, more efficient. But the Interceptor didn't hide what was happening. It showed you. And for many enthusiasts, that was the attraction. The motorcycle became a relationship between rider and machine. You learned its habits. You listened to its sounds. You understood its maintenance requirements. And when everything was working properly, the reward was enormous. The Interceptor could feel fast, purposeful, and completely alive. It also had an advantage that many modern motorcycles don't have. Its simplicity made the machine understandable. A skilled mechanic could work on the engine without needing specialized electronic equipment. The mechanical components were accessible. The systems were visible. The rider could understand how the motorcycle worked. That was valuable in an era when motorcycles were expected to be maintained by their owners. But simplicity had a price. British manufacturers struggled with quality control. Electrical problems could damage reputations. Oil leaks became part of the stereotype. Vibration could loosen components. Starting procedures could require patience. None of these things necessarily made every motorcycle unreliable, but the reputation was difficult to escape. And reputation matters enormously in a competitive market. A manufacturer can build a great motorcycle and still lose customers if buyers don't trust the brand. Royal Enfield therefore needed the Interceptor to prove that it could build a modern performance motorcycle. The bike had the hardware. What it lacked was the enormous manufacturing power of the companies arriving from Japan. This was the real battle. The Interceptor wasn't simply fighting Japanese motorcycles on the road. It was fighting Japanese manufacturing. That is a much harder opponent. A motorcycle can be redesigned. A factory is much harder to transform. The Japanese companies were increasingly able to produce motorcycles in large numbers while maintaining consistent quality. British companies were struggling with costs, labor problems, corporate structures, and an industry that was becoming increasingly unforgiving. Royal Enfield was not immune. The British motorcycle market was shrinking. Competition was increasing, and the economics of producing relatively expensive motorcycles were becoming difficult. Yet the Interceptor continued to evolve. Later versions would receive improvements to the engine, chassis, brakes, and styling. The Series 2 would eventually become one of the most recognized forms of the model, especially in America. That development shows that Royal Enfield wasn't simply giving up. The company continued trying to make the Interceptor more competitive. But the larger industry was moving too quickly. The motorcycle world that had once been dominated by British twins was beginning to disappear. The Interceptor, therefore, became something more than a product. It became a final statement. It represented what Royal Enfield could do when it pushed its traditional engineering philosophy toward the performance market. The motorcycle was large. It was fast. It was stylish. And it had enough character to make riders remember it decades later. That last part is important. There are many motorcycles that were technically better than the Interceptor. There are many that were faster. There are many that were more reliable. But very few have the same historical atmosphere. The Interceptor belongs to the final generation of British performance twins before the Japanese Revolution completely changed the market. It was born in a world where riders still understood motorcycles through their engines, where a motorcycle's exhaust note mattered, where chrome mattered, where mechanical maintenance was part of ownership, and where a fast British twin could still be a dream machine. That world was disappearing. But the Interceptor didn't disappear quietly. It developed a following, particularly among American riders, and surviving examples became increasingly appreciated by collectors and enthusiasts. Part of that appreciation comes from rarity. Part comes from performance. But a huge part comes from what the motorcycle represents. It represents the moment when Britain still believed it could compete. The Interceptor wasn't a desperate attempt to copy a Japanese motorcycle. It was Royal Enfield trying to win with its own strengths. A big parallel twin, strong torque, traditional styling, mechanical character, and enough speed to make the motorcycle genuinely exciting. That philosophy had worked for British motorcycles for decades. The problem was that the rules were changing. The Japanese manufacturers were introducing motorcycles that could combine performance with a level of refinement that the British industry struggled to match. The Interceptor couldn't stop that transformation. But it could prove that Britain still had something to say. And perhaps that's the best way to remember it. Not as the motorcycle that defeated the Japanese. It didn't. But as one of the British motorcycles that refused to surrender. The 1967 Royal Enfield Interceptor 750 was an attempt to take everything riders loved about a big British twin and push it into a more competitive, higher performance package. It was Royal Enfield saying, "We can build a serious 750. We can make it fast. We can make it exciting. And we can put it on the same road as the world's newest motorcycles." For a brief moment, that was enough. The engine fired. The twin exhausts came alive. The motorcycle moved forward. And the rider could forget about the changing industry for a few miles. That is perhaps the real magic of the Interceptor. It allowed the rider to experience the final years of the British twin era without knowing exactly how close that era was to ending. Today, the motorcycle's specifications are interesting. The 736cc engine is interesting. The performance is interesting. The history is fascinating. But the deeper story is about timing. Royal Enfield built one of its most ambitious motorcycles just as the world was preparing to move beyond the type of machine it represented. That makes the Interceptor more than a classic. It makes it a time capsule, a machine caught between two motorcycle worlds. Behind it was the age of British twins. Ahead of it was the age of Japanese engineering. And sitting right in the middle was a 750cc Royal Enfield that refused to look backward. The Interceptor 750 didn't change the outcome of the motorcycle industry. But it proved that Royal Enfield could still build something fast, charismatic, and genuinely desirable. It fought with the tools Britain had always understood. A big twin, a strong engine, a beautiful shape, and a rider willing to become part of the machine. The Japanese Revolution was coming. There was no stopping it. But before that new era completely arrived, the Royal Enfield Interceptor 750 had one last thing to say. Britain wasn't finished yet.